That was fantastic. Thank you.
Hi guys, thank you, Dr. Kai Syng. We just have a moment where we swap the transition in the group. Okay. Okay. We do an introduction of everyone. Yeah. Maybe I'll do a very quick introduction of all the artists and participants of Deep Field Cinema. And I'm really grateful for my interns and my students here as well to helping us throughout, I think, 1 whole month or 2 months. Yeah. So firstly, Dr. Tan Kai Syng just gave a keynote for us, and now she is still in UK. Previously, we planned for let her to fly in, but unfortunately, we're all stuck in this situation. But I think it's still good. We still rely on technology.
I want to go back. I'll be safer in Singapore.
You miss the food, right? Yeah. And we have our international artists. Yeah, international artists with IFT from Tokyo, Interdisciplinary Art Festival Tokyo, with Song Nam Han, who is our invited artist, and also with Tasman Richardson, who is now based in Canada, and Rafaël, who is now in Belgium. That's right, in Brussels. Okay, you all look very cozy and warm. Okay, yeah. And now in present, in the space, where's Cécile? Cécile. Cécile is part of our Singapore team. So Cécile, she was based in Singapore for a long time. Now she's back in Paris. So Cécile, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And in the room here now, we have our Singapore participants. Maybe on your
there's no left or right.
Yeah, I'm trying to get everyone.
Left or right. Okay, so on right or left side of your screen, we have Ernest Wu. Yeah, and beside him we have Jake Tan. They are working as a team for the presentation for Deep Field Cinema. And today, after this, Cécile, Jake, and Ernest, and Tasman will be presenting for tonight. And behind me, we have Chong Lii. He has presented on the second day, yesterday. And we have one more artist, Teow, who is on the way. He has presented on the first day with me. We were doing VJ and sound work. And we are intermission, Urich and myself. And yeah, I think we have maybe some audience online. Also, maybe I pose the first question first. Hold on.
So hi, we also welcome our physical audience. So feel free to just ask any questions later on. I'll just like to do a kind of like an introduction as thinking about the idea of deep field. And it was very much inspired by this idea that the Hubble telescope is looking into the space for unknown galaxies. And we found that this was quite a fertile ground for reflection on the condition that we are in now. And I think like it kind of really links very nicely with what Kai Syng has shared with us about these speculative questions about the future. Not so speculative, but also bringing us through a kind of like brief media, cinematic history, and so on. That perhaps the idea of experimental or the idea of cinema itself there is a form of crisis that of course has been exacerbated by this pandemic. So I think responding to this, perhaps I would just like to sort of like also state that we wanted this to be a physical event for all the performers to be present here, but because this kind of was also quite a beautiful way of making this deep field cinema work, because there is this kind of like projection, there's this kind of relay. There is almost like each of us, we are taking a telescope and we are kind of like trying to look into and trying to understand this unknown. So we are, I just hope that this conversation today will kind of try to unpack some of these underlying questions that we have with us. So perhaps the first question is to think about, I think the loss of this sort of like communality, the loss of this sense of being able to be able to be in the same place to sort of like experience a work together. So Rafael, I'm actually thinking about you kind of like rented a club or some kind of event venue for your performance that you recorded, and I mean this image kind of comes back to me as I'm thinking about this idea of that, you know, these spaces for events are now empty. There is a kind of this form of performing to the camera and having to sort of broadcast, and maybe you could share with us a bit about how that experience was, of kind of like doing a performance to the camera, and perhaps some of the related thoughts about collaboration and also sharing your work across through with this means. I think you are muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Did you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep.
Yeah. Hello. Nice to meet you. So you heard me, right? You heard me good?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. How it was more easy, in fact, because I can redo if I make a mistake. That's the first thing come in my mind. Maybe it's a bit disappointed, but well, personally, I realize that when I perform anyway, I feel so alone, and it's like the audience is far away. Maybe it's not good, but it's like that. So here I have to imagine an audience.
No, we lost him.
I'm not sure it's so different, except that you don't have any interaction, and also you know, I come from photography, so we work with time. So first we do a photo, then you have to develop the photo. So you have a long time, right? So it reminds me the photo. So I do a performance, but I don't have the result directly. So it made me think about that. Maybe I disappoint you with my response, but it made me think about that. The tempo. And when you perform directly, you depend on the people reaction. Here too, but you have more time. That, you know, it's more cold. It's a more cold relation with your work. The good things when you have an audience, and all the bad things is that you have a direct reaction. Here not. So it's more cold. And that's why, in fact, it's funny because that's why I do performance, because so I come from photography, and my relation with my work was my photo on the wall, like soldier, is like dead already, you know. And performance attract me because I have to defend in a way, or show my work directly, a bit like a musician. And here again, I feel like I come back to photo, you know. I need to wait your feedback. I'm sorry for my response. I just wake up. Maybe you can ask somebody else.
Yeah, thanks. I think, yeah, the relationship to temporality is something that has kind of like, it somehow feels like audiovisual, there's this kind of going back to the idea of, the aura of the image, or kind of idea of presence, and also whether with like broadcast technology, we are talking a lot more about editing than anything. And one thing that you kind of I got from what you said is also this idea of the relay. It's almost like there is a lapse, there's a gap before the reception of the work, and this is very much it could be a delay, it could be a relay, and so on. Yeah, so I'm wondering also, anyone else has any thoughts regarding this notion of deep field? Maybe Tasman, you might like to respond.
Yeah, sorry, I just was very interested in two things. That first in the talk, and then again now, Rafaël, like what you were talking about, there's a parallel. I'm very interested in this idea that we talk about television being dead, and yet many of us are very interested in performance for the very reason that early television had any value at all, which was the live synchronicity. If you can imagine, like, it's so strange that we were broadcast at one point, which forced us all to share time. We're in different spaces, but at least we had time. And now, with the fragmentation, the hyper-individual experience of viewing, being that we don't even have time anymore, we have our individual bubbles of time. And so it's a little bit difficult to feel contact. And performance, although it can be remote, at least gives us that a chance to feel synchronicity with the audience and with each other. And I'm curious about that, because I wonder if we keep expanding cinema and we keep expanding and fragmenting the modes by which we mediate these experiences, it opens it up not only to manipulation and disinformation, but it also opens it up to an ongoing rabbit hole of the self, the blinders of existing in your stream. And sadly, we're not in control of our algorithms. So your stream is very much constantly feeding you what it thinks you want, and you get less and less of the discovery. Even the idea of cinema being on YouTube is interesting, but at the same time, it's like the old video stores, which are very much gone. Luckily, I live in Toronto. We still have quite a few, actually. It's got a really weird culture for this because of the underground obsession with uniqueness. So people can still find footage that you're never going to find in an archive or on YouTube or on Netflix. And I wonder if that needs to be sort of another branch of, like, I'm babbling, but I'm looking for a technology to resurge with not so much individualism, which I respect and appreciate, but caring about the idea of, we say community, what does that mean? Does that include the outliers? Does it include this sort of strange uniqueness, and then tie back to synchronous time, shared time?
Thank you so much, Tasman. The fact that so much of media has kind of been archived, has sort of been captured into this kind of huge digital archive, but at the same time to remind us that there are still some of these sort of like traces and unknown histories that might be sort of like remnants, right? They are sort of like left in spaces that you have to be physically present to access. And that kind of like also strangely brings me to also think about Chong Lii and his research about and in the presentation of his film, and also thinking about the traces that you were trying to evoke through your film, some that could be seen and some that were not really seen. So I'm wondering how these sort of like unknown histories or histories that were kind of like being marginalized, kind of how did you try to weave them into your film?
Right. Yeah, so I think
for context, this film was initially kind of like mainly the product of a very specific historical interest, so something that's very grounded and properly archived. It wasn't necessarily what you would call fiction, even though it was very fertile for fiction. Basically, I was very interested. I was based in Amsterdam for a bit. I was studying there, and I found out not too long ago that in the 70s, which is probably when Singapore was just freshly independent, there was a gang or a secret society basically that migrated all the way to Amsterdam and became the largest heroin syndicate for a few decades in Central Europe. Yeah, and I mean, if you're Singaporean, like you get this because they call themselves Akong, and which translates easily to like grandfather, and it's a term that's like used very colloquially and sometimes irreverently as well, like depending on the context. It's kind of like an in-joke of sorts. So they called themselves that. Became one of the most violent gangs in Europe from like the 80s and 90s. And eventually, the Dutch government got so frustrated with them, they actually had to kind of reach out to Singapore to collaborate on getting on a sting operation to deport this secret society. So many of them would diminish after that, and some of them, especially the big bosses, kind of went on to create like Asian supermarkets and went into hiding. So that's the kind of groundwork. And I think my fascination with that, just to sum it up, was basically just that you have this side of history, which is I feel personally is very common in the region of Southeast Asia as well, and in particular, Singapore is fascinating because we engage with history in a very fragmented way, and that makes it interesting because I think my stance is that it's already ripe for fictionalization, and it's ripe for a certain level of, in a way, disinformation. I find that fascinating because that makes it interesting material artistically. You know, of course, there is that other side to it which makes it harmful when you apply in a contemporary setting, and I think that is the frustration that I started to kind of like realize was interesting to work with for the film. That you kind of have, you know, individuals and a narrator that shouldn't necessarily be someone who it should be suspended basically in that space of knowing just enough but still kind of going ahead with it. And I think that is a sort of like consciousness and a sort of like attitude that feels highly charged today. Yeah.
Thanks, Chong Lii. So I guess like there's something about history that also works its way into this sort of unknown, because there might be retellings, there might be sort of like new encounters with things in the past. So actually, I would like to sort of like direct this to Songnam and your sort of excavation or kind of looking into your own personal history, and also that is kind of like reflected through your artistic practice, and also your whole life. And so I was just thinking how this ability to sort of like look forward into the future also has kind of like a rear view mirror where we are looking back as well, a sort of reassessment of that. And there could be moments that when I was watching the film, that there were also moments that feel like they could be unknown, or they could kind of be strange. So maybe you can share a bit about your process while sort of like making this work. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I did a performance 2 days ago, and it was really great time. because it was in Japan, in Tokyo. It was snowing that day, only one day. The first snow in this year, and yes, I started do the performer. I mean, artist from since 2000, and I have many very small fragments of moving images, and usually I don't use it, my those images, moving images, because it's too private and it's not my style. But I started Interdisciplinary Art Festival Tokyo, maybe 7th year this year. So I just wanted to show my life is kind of one of women's life. I can say it is very women's life. Also, at the same time, director's life and artist's life. So yeah, it's not so very dramatic scenes. It's no nothing there, but people can watch kind of those theme. Maybe all people understand, and it also Johan said that we can realize that that era, also the very local scenes in the Japanese local scenes. There are lots of like that, and then customs, or also I'm a Korean living in Japan, so a little bit different from other Japanese people, and yeah, very short. Maybe one scene is a kind of 3 seconds or 5 seconds. That's. And also I did walking along the stream, and I'm doing Zoom, so streaming along the stream. It's not a gag, but I tried like that. But yeah, that's my performance, and I'm really and June really helped me a lot. Thank you very much. And if I have time, a little bit about the talk about why I chose Rafael and the Tasman. Can I? Is that okay? Okay. Interdisciplinary Art Festival Tokyo is a very small festival. I have two purposes. One is expanding the opportunity for the artists to present their works by introducing experimental and avant-garde art. Also, one more point is the international exchange through art. So I'm always doing many artist collectives and local artists and other many international yeah people. And for this theme, I want to ask intermission later. Deep field cinema is a very great theme, and before I heard this theme, I wanted to introduce individual artists who emphasize an individual perspective, and also seek a way of video that is neither YouTuber not a movie. And also I'm interesting. I live in eastern part of the world, but Rafael and the Tasman are western part. So I very very violent world, like the eastern side is kind of Namjoon Pike. So like well, I felt like that, and also west at the same the western part is kind of Villa. It's very strict way of thinking of beautiful, what beautiful is, or something that maybe Rafael and Tasman don't agree with it, but I felt like something like they are very strong images. So I felt like that, and also, but we can I think also at the same time our boundaries are disappearing, but there are still locals and differences in values. So this is the point I created Rafael and the Tasman, and they are very good artists. Okay, thank you. Sorry, a very long time I spoke.
I think that makes us on the Singapore side. We also would like to share a bit about the artists as well. So I think perhaps I would just sort of like shift to think about as well the idea of deep field even within the local context here in Singapore. I think there are a lot of histories or sort of like interconnections that are still waiting to be made. Everyone seems to be kind of like doing different things here and there, but there's no concerted effort to sort of like bring everything together. I think provocation by Kai Syng as well about the academic side is also really important. I guess like so we were really excited to be able to bring together everyone here. Maybe we can start off with Jake and Ernest, who presenting something called intelligent machines, interconnected machines, and using sort of like scientific or visual techniques to actually bring out some sort of expression or giving life to a bonsai. So maybe I'll just get them to talk a bit about the idea of like looking into a life form and how sort of like the visualizing a life form can kind of has sort of like brought them like looking into this sort of unknown.
So I think I would just want to practice this with a little bit of a thought that I think most of us sort of has in our head that 2020 just sort of didn't exist in some way, or that everything else is sort of happening somewhere else in the world and not right where we are. So I think our collaboration and our work together looks at nature, looks at, and in this case, a particular bonsai that we have sort of based in some ways, and looking at it and thinking how we can translate its experience as well. I think later when we do this reading, this is still a work in progress, but later when we do this reading, we sort of see different methods that we sort of run through, trying to translate how a plant visualizes certain things, how plant experiences time, how using different methods of observation.
Yeah, so I guess we tried different methods, not just like things that we are very comfortable with, like art-based stuff with like cameras and whatnot, but we tried to delve a little bit into like the scientific aspect of observation, like how do scientists look at things. So we but in no means like we are treading, like we want to say that we are scientists or what, but we want to understand the methodology of using scientific methods to get to a conclusion. We don't really have a conclusion for what we want to show. It's just several methods of how we see things. So we collaborated with some institutions to get some imageries and access to equipment like microscopes and whatnot. We use engineering methods or like 3D scanning and such. So I guess like it's just trying to make sense of data from an artist's perspective.
Perhaps we can also continue to sort of like maybe Humping, you can share a bit with us this, as we are thinking, like for example for Tasman's work is we are really looking at that kind of like planetary scale. But here in your work, I think there's a relation to time as well. That it was about 2-year duration of creating the ceramic, and this kind of like delay in the outcome, and also process of like creating eclipse, and in this the performance that you did, looking at the terrain or the textures of these ceramic reliefs. So I'm wondering about this kind of like process in terms of discovery or the unknown, and of course also your kind of relation to Singapore's film history, sort of like uncovering some of these connections. Perhaps you can share with us a bit about.
Apologies for being late. But I was listening in on my way here. Even got to catch Kai Syng's presentation. Really set a good foundation for what we talk about now. Okay, in relation to Irhan's question, yes, this work that I presented was 2 years ago. It's called Suspensions of a Nautilus. It's actually not an entirely new work. It's actually a remix of a work that I completed 2 years ago, which is titled Dance of a Humble Atheist. And Dance of a Humble Atheist, as Irhan has described, took me 2 years to create. And it's actually because of the medium. It's actually because of the medium that I was using. So I was creating an animation, a moving image, animated moving image, using ceramic tiles, ceramic reliefs. So the use of clay and animation, resulting not in a claymation, but animated animation, stop motion animation of fired ceramic tiles. And that process will take a long time because you have to sculpt and create the pieces and then scan them and animate them. And that 2-year process also enabled me to actually reaching the ideas that would go behind the work. So the ideas and the conceptualization was constantly evolving. And it's a work that essentially that seeks to help me fortify my beliefs, some of my spiritual or non-spiritual beliefs. Me being an atheist, fortifying my atheism. So thus the title, Dance of a Humble Atheist, thinking in terms of my own death. Is there an afterlife? Can we transcend our human existences and representing them through living images, animated living images? And to even create a piece, animated piece that would survive time, human's time, again, in terms of deep time. Because these animated pieces, they are for a moving image, but they don't decay like film, or they don't disappear like digital images over time. So even another species that will evolve beyond humans to come and discover it, we just perceive them as a moving image of animation. So I was thinking and imagining in terms of that. I thought of, so for deep field cinema, I thought of remixing that, because as Ernest has mentioned, 2020 didn't happen for many of us. I was sort of impacted by that as well. I thought my life was suspended. So hence the title of the new work for Suspensions of the Universe. So we were not in the mindset to actually create anything entirely new. So I thought of just going back to the whole work, advancing it a little, and broadening it a little. So it's not just deep field, but a broad view to go into other areas, to take some risks that you will never embark upon yourself. So that's why when Urich asked in invited me to participate, I don't mind, because I've never done DJing. So to get Urich to actually to witness Urich take my work apart, it's really exhilarating. You know? Yeah, and to do it in a format that's online, where there's a very small physical audience, and so you just let go of the work, because I used to have very much control over my works. I want to make sure everything is fine-tuned, but for this work, I just let go. And yeah, because you don't have an audience who's watching you, under less pressure. Yeah, so yeah, I find it a really enlightening experience.
We try to speak up louder.
Okay.
They can't hear on the Zoom.
Okay.
I would like to also kind of like direct this to Cecile. I think it's again thinking about something that is that you have collected here in Singapore, all the clips, and there is this this delay, this kind of like time for gestation, for you to sort of like deal with the clips and to think through, and also having to sort of like move back to France. So I was wondering about this duration, this period of time, this moment in your life. How has that kind of sort of like informed your work, and also in relation to the theme of the film?
It's okay. Address this question. Address the same question.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
I can't hear you at all. This mic is very directional. I didn't understand your question, sorry. Only when you speak really in front of it, I can hear. Urich told me it's okay on YouTube, but I guess I can't watch on YouTube at the same time as I'm watching here. So is it okay for the other one? Am I the only one with this sound problem?
No, I'm having the same trouble, but I can hear you clearly.
Okay, yes, every participant I can hear, but in the Hothouse, I can't hear anything. So, but
I mean, is this okay?
Yes, no. I think the mic is really bad. So anyway, maybe I can talk a bit. So thank you so much. I'm so glad to work with you and INTER mission, and very nice to meet you.
Hello. Is this sound all right? Is this okay? Okay, yes, Cecile, yes. So the question I was asking earlier, it's very much about sort of like holding with you all these memories as in the form of footages that you have collected in your time here, and also sort of like going back to France. And I was just wondering, during this period of time, where how has your relationship with the clips, and also in your own experiences, how has that sort of space been like for you? You can also continue to share a bit about what you were talking about earlier.
Okay, so my relationship with what? Sorry. Well,
the film footages that you shot here in Singapore.
Yes, so it's at the first time it should have been a performance, a live editing performance, maybe in interaction with sound. I use Isadora. It's a small software like MaxMSP to do VJing, but I don't like to call it VJing. I like to call it online live editing, because my first job is I'm a film editor. So by playing live, I try to find a new way of editing, in fact. New way to editing without a cut is very interesting, because now usually narration comes with a cut of, you know what I mean. But with multiple screen, interaction with the audience, improvisation, it's a very, to me, it's a very new kind of finding storytelling, which I think is very interesting, like, yes, like maybe music improvisation. So this performance was not possible because my internet was not so good and maybe too complicated. So I chose to edit all my footage to make a 12-minute film. I don't know, you will see it later maybe. I don't know at all what it is. So it's all about my memories. My footage, usually I always have a small camera in my pocket and a microphone. So I shoot a lot, but and I'm really nostalgic about analog film, especially Super 8 millimeters. And ideally, I would have loved to do a Super 8 millimeters film. So all my footage, as you will see, are very low-fi quality, as a reference to old movie, maybe even 19th century movie. So my first idea was to asking myself, what is a memory? As I left a few months ago, Singapore, after living there for 5 years, and now I'm in Paris, nearly jobless. No, I've got a few jobs, but you know, life is very difficult. Not homeless, but nearly. You know, I do a bit of teaching and some editing job, but very slowly and slowly. And the COVID is, of course, not a nice time to live, but it's very interesting. So I don't know at all. What I tried to do was to feel really free with the usage of all those footage, random footage. And after that, I wanted to make a second part, my new life in Paris, not about me, but about the feeling. And I began to shoot a lot, but nothing was interesting. I don't know why. I can't use the Paris, my new life can't be shot yet. I don't know. I tried a lot and it was not so interesting. So I'm not the best one. I ended the editing yesterday evening, so I'm not the best one to speak about what I did, but I'm looking forward to your feedback if you have. And about, about the new situation and maybe if the COVID wasn't existing, we wouldn't meet so much. Thanks to, maybe I wouldn't have met you. So there's some, and all the online performance I saw 2 days ago and yesterday, it's really, really fascinating. But of course, I wish I was there with you.
Thanks so much. So there's a question from the online audience. So by Sorrow Greens, how has the pandemic affected artists in the art scene? Since we have, I mean, there's so many of us. I think this will be the last question. But I think I would just like to elaborate on it a bit. I think with sort of the talk by performance lecture by Kai Syng, I guess we are really in this moment of sort of it's not kind of like unprecedented because many kind of like media artists that were before us have already sort of like they have looked into this unknown, right? They have explored the idea of telepresence. They have explored the idea of cinema that is performance in frames and all these kind of things. So I mean, I'm particularly thinking a lot about video art these days because that was when lot of experimentation on these things were going on. So, but at the same time, there's also this kind of like need for new spaces as we think about perhaps like cinema is under threat, the theater itself. Performance venues might have to be closed down for the time being. So what kind of like new spaces can emerge? So I think that is a question that I would also like to pose in terms of how, yes, on one hand we are affected, but at the same time, what are these sort of like possibilities that emerge from this new modality or this new way of creating. So perhaps each of you or whoever would like to respond, you can share a bit about the artistic conditions where you are, and also whether you have some sort of like insight or some sort of projection into this unknown. I'll let Ernest.
Yeah, I think I just want to quickly point out how complicated and how is it now?
Just try to speak up.
I just want to point out how complicated and how extremely connected everything is here. So like we have a 3 cam setup with 3 different computers running with connections to all over the world. Endless. It's projected to 2 different screens. One projector that has an audience side, as well as on our side where we're looking at the laptop, and then multiple audio sources and multiple different outputs, and all this is just connected by a nest of wires. And I think that is I guess a very right image of how everything is suddenly interconnected in that way. Yeah.
Anyone else would like to respond?
I would just say that interestingly in Toronto, I've been having this very strange thing. Every now and then, like, you're working in your medium, and sometimes if you're in a rut, you take a break from it. Like, I know when I was editing a lot, for a period there, I stopped, I wrote music, and then that was my thing. And then I came back from music, and whatever you change to becomes a perspective that you bring back to your original practice, and it morphs, right? And it's right now, it's like this condition of not being able to show in exhibition spaces and not being able to do anything performatively online that has impact because it doesn't connect. I've been collaborating with another artist in Toronto, Crystal Jacks, who goes by the name Bridget Bardont. But anyway, the point is that we started doing maps, just these like sort of like booklets, almost like a magazine, and it's very tactile. There's no batteries, there's no power required, just maps of where to go in our city that is not part of the regular terrain, like back alleys, places you would never normally go. And if you go there, you discover these drones, these sort of incidental ambient noise of the city that mostly we spend all our time blocking out, all the noise canceling, you know what I mean? So these things became almost like curated exhibitions. Like, if you go to these coordinates, you will find this convergence of noise that you didn't even know was there. And strangely, it's starting to catch on. I don't know if I can say it's caught on yet, but I think it just comes down to temporarily improvising and completely being willing to give up. Like, instead of trying to force yourself to recreate the thing you're missing. Like, oh, let's make a venue virtually. You can't really. Or let's make touch, but through a screen. You can't. So just accept that you can't and take advantage of what you've been ignoring, which is very present, and give it a new context, at least for now. That was sort of a one workaround I found.
Can I say something just to add to that also? but also in response to what Cécile was saying about nostalgia. Because someone else was also talking about nostalgia. Who was it? Was it Tasman? I can't remember. But I think there's something about nostalgia relating to what Tasman was saying about this introspection and this kind of keeping, kind of almost like having blinders on, and like all the adverts or whatever directed at you just gets you further into your own kind of hole, your own rabbit hole, and it's your own kind of echo chamber, your own hall of mirrors. But because I'm having to teach now a lot. I don't usually because we are trying to save money, etc. So I'm having to do a lot of teaching when I usually don't. But one thing I noticed with my students, they're really young. Like some of them are like, I don't know, 20. And then they have a weird nostalgia and they tell me they know it's a weird nostalgia. They like Polaroids. They went to buy a synth machine and they made synth. And I'm like, gosh, that's my son. I grew up with that. How dare you? But they think it's sexy and cool because they're like, oh, I want to be like Hito Steyer, you know, I want to be doing some video art, canonical video art stuff. And it's just really, really creepy because they are, and then they're kind of copying the aesthetics, which is kind of, okay, that's common enough, but it's just kind of interesting because it's this whole thing about YouTube compressing time, and then now we have this weird sense of location, weird sense of time. So I don't know what my main statement was, but I think there's something about this introspection and something about this kind of nostalgia or sense of something, sense of the past, or sense of some sort of a compression, I suppose.
It's so interesting. I just have to say, it's so funny you should say that, because for sure, when all of us were studying at some point, we would have emulated what came before. And I have no question that, like, I watched a lot of Twilight Zone. I wasn't born in the era of Twilight Zone, but I know all the Twilight Zones. I know about film noir. I know about emulating that look. And the difference, though, is now with the accelerated bubble of time, this fragmented time, I see it too. I see young people like collecting VHS, and you're like, cassettes is making a comeback. Like, you're like, really? And I think it might have to do with like the disconnected autonomy of those mediums. A lot of those formats do not have an internet connection, and we take it for granted. But like, there's a lot of young people who I think are a little bit longing for a time when they're not being self-surveyed or constantly connected. There's a sort of cutting the tether medium, that only you can watch it and it can't be shared. There's something kind of special about that.
I have kind of, to me, it's very much about this idea of how the future is kind of constantly being predicted by algorithms. And essentially what is happening is that there's a kind of like impotence. We are unable to act. And there is this kind of like idea that we are unable to envision the future. It is kind of like unknown to us. And so people kind of like, this is my personal thought, is that they find refuge in the past. They find sort of like and of course with the internet, it has also allowed us to access what is known as the long tail. This whole kind of like subgenres, all these very detailed things that we could not access in the past, they are now available. And so nostalgia can then become this kind of like refuge. But of course, the analog as well, there's this constant sort of like shift between the analog and digital that is constantly like, yes, we are watching things on the screen, but no, we want to go back to the cinema. And then, there's this kind of like push and pull that constantly kind of like goes in a loop. Anyone else would like to kind of share about your present conditions and also views about art in the pandemic?
I'll say something about what I'm doing right now. My practice now is actually a little schizophrenic. So I spend half my time working on my new art video experimental film piece, and the other half of my time is spent on YouTube. So Kai Syng mentioned that the students are like going rediscovering Polaroid, all the analog media. But in fact, I might be one of those young ones. So I'm actually trying to collect as many old Singapore-made films. Yeah, so I've been collecting them for about 8 to 10 years. It's only recently, because of the pandemic, where everyone is watching films online, I decided to share my entire collection online. And I hope to do so, and I promise to do so until the pandemic ends. So I'm actually uploading one film every 1 or 2 days, So Singapore films, and the bulk of them are actually made in the 1950s and 60s, and I wasn't even born before that. Yeah, so the majority of them are actually Malay films. So I have a YouTube channel, and so I mentioned half of my time was spent making my own. So I was disconnected, or just on my own house, making my own PC secretly. I'm not gonna tell anyone what it's about because it's not ready yet. And the other half of the time, I'm just reaching out to this YouTube audience, which I'm somewhat very strange to say is hitting 4 million views. It's 4 million views, and I'm just entirely surprised because my own works hardly get 100 viewers. Well, these old films, and they're getting reached beyond Singapore. Because 70% of my audience are from Malaysia, because they're all Malay films. And I was looking at demographics. I mean, YouTube analytics allow you to actually give you an overview in terms of the data. So the 20 to 30 age is actually a significant number. And once you reach the 30s to 40s, which is my age, it's a dip, and then you see it rising again for those of 50 and plus. So the youngsters are actually very much interested in this old films. Yeah, maybe seeking for a different kind of nostalgia and escape from the present. Yeah, I'm not sure what they're going to do with it and do with these films. I know for the old ones, it's probably just nostalgia because it's the time that we watch the films in the cinema. But for the young ones, what are they going to do? For myself, I'm going to do a mix, like a found footage film. But for those the younger ones watching, no idea. And this is interesting to just find out and see what comes out of this sharing. Yeah. So I mean, this sharing is very useful because we are finding people are sharing more because I didn't monetize my channel, and more people are actually doing that. So they're sharing those very rare films that we never watched before, and never got to collect. But, yeah, and it's only during this pandemic that this thing is happening, at least from my perspective. Yeah. You're keen to check it out. Yeah, it's called HP YouTube channel. Malay films. Just search for HP Malay films. You'll find my channel. You watch some Singapore made stuff 60 years ago. Thanks.
Any other respondents?
Maybe want some. Yeah. We still have an audience here. If the audience has anything to say. Yeah. Yeah, really enjoy it. Yeah. On the dark side.
Yeah, you can just
Hi, my name is from Singapore. I was just thinking, responding to what was shared earlier. I'm just thinking that, as the younger generation, I'm still in my 30s now. So the younger generation who have not experienced physical format, it could be the materiality of that. Like I use Devon modular since as well, and I really like it because it brought me back to physical mix of electronic forces. Yeah, and I think that's something that I didn't grow up with. And I only experienced was with like 3D files kind of thing. So that was something that I was also looking out for, like, oh, there's this physical format now, I can like manipulate knobs and buttons and things. And that kind of like made me excited. So perhaps this digital generation is like everything was streamlined, digital, and you don't get that materiality, that the tactile feeling anymore. So that's really something that we're looking out for as we look through all films and
yeah, I think maybe I should have the last outro, and we can go for dinner before we come back with screening by Cécile, Jake, and Ernest, and Tasman's work. So I think with all this that have been said, I find that as a fulfilling project, when we first thought this idea, the deep field meaning really talks about the unknown, because we really don't know what's going on during this time. And I think through the processes and working together and talking to the artists and publication, whether it's physical or online, I think we sort of still in the murky waters, but I think we are trying to get to somewhere. So the deep field idea is looking at a direction that we know there is something there, but we don't know what is going to happen, but there's something there. So with this thought, I think I will conclude, and I want to thank everyone again. Yeah, maybe NEC won't listen, but thank you NEC also. Maybe they are here. So I see some views online now, but I'm not sure who it is. So thank you for all the artists. Thank you our international artists. Thank you our keynote speaker, and all our audience as well, and all the assistants and my interns helping us. So we'll come back again at 7:30 Singapore time, and we will upload the link again. Right? Yeah, have a link again. So stay tuned for the film cinema. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Back to bed.
4 a.m.